This conference will now be recorded.
So we will make a recording of this. If you have colleagues that might be interested, let me know, and we'll be glad to get them the link for this. So I'm going to go ahead and start by sharing my screen, and good. I think everybody can see that. So this is basically a industry update focused on Eurocre, and we'll be looking at the whole world, but we'll be focused on a specific area. Here's a quick look at our agenda today. We're going to take a look at really what's going on around the world from a hotel industry performance point of view. And we'll be looking at downturns, and then in certain areas, we'll be talking about recoveries. So recoveries are in process, and that'll be exciting to watch in the next months to come. So this is sort of where we're headed. So we're going to start with sort of a worldwide perspective, and this is just from last week. Now, important to emphasize, we get monthly data from hotels. We also get daily data from hotels. So the daily data we're getting every day, every week. So when I'm showing you this graph, I'm showing you data from just a week ago, and sometimes it'll be a week or two before that. This is sort of a scatter plot of all the markets. So the dots in here are all the different markets, and you're going to see various weeks go by up into the week of May 2nd. And you're going to see where those various markets play out in the spectrum. We're looking at actual occupancy. So if you notice, at the beginning, if we go all the way back to January, we're looking at occupancies, averaging around 60%, but going all the way from 99 down. And you can see over time that in March, we had a big drop, and we really hit bottom that week of March, end of March, beginning of April. Those were sort of the bottom weeks in terms of all the markets and how they distributed from an actual occupancy point of view. Now, it has gone up a little bit. There are some outliers that we can talk more about as well, but generally we're seeing a little bit of recovery. Hotel closures have been a significant part of the story for this event, and you see hotel closures around the world. This is as of the end of April, and you can see percentage of hotels closed throughout the world. Now we are beginning to see reopenings, which is exciting. Here's occupancies of hotels, and again, this is April data. So just recent data, and you can see occupancies around the world, even some in the single digits, but many close to the 10% mark around the world. And then countries and this is just sort of, we're putting countries in buckets by occupancies, and we see a lot of them with occupancies lower than 30%. We've been tracking countries where they fit in these various buckets over throughout the entire time period. So this is just a snapshot of that, where we're at right now. Now, I showed this last time, and this is a heat map of the world, and it is a running 7-day occupancy percent change. So it's simply comparing the week excuse me, to the prior week. And sorry. So if you can, and this jumps all the way back to January. You can see in January things were looking good. Beginning of January, equal number of green and red marks. Now, watch as we go on. If we jump up 2 weeks, we can begin to see some problems going on in China. You can see most of China is red, although it's just light red. And that was coming back after the Chinese New Year. One more week, and that's basically showing you when China was locked down. So basically things were shut at this point. Hotels were dramatically impacted. Now we jump ahead one more week and we begin to see uh, issues leaving China into Asia. Here's 1 week, and then here's 2 more weeks, and you begin to see at this point it is, it's impacting countries throughout Asia. A lot of, and notice China here is going from light red to medium and dark. 1 more week, now we begin to see it hit land in Europe, and you see Italy impacted. You see Milan up in the corner, and that's the very first week of March. 1 more week in March, and a lot of Europe was beginning to lock down. Flights were being restricted, and then we jump ahead. Mid-March is really where it began to impact, leave Europe and go elsewhere. You see America's almost all light red. That's mid-March. 1 more week, and we can see almost everywhere is medium or dark red, and then 1 more week. Actually, yeah, 1 more week by end of March. As we saw before, that's really where everybody was sort of at the bottom. In April, not too much has changed. We are beginning to see some green. Those little things are green shoots, and we're seeing some green in different areas. And over the last couple of weeks, we've been seeing that, and that's of course what everybody's looking at right now. Let's go back to China for a second. Let's take a look at the time series here. And of course, China hit bottom. I have slides showing the decrease, but I'm working on a lot of slides, and so if you have anything else that you would like to see, don't hesitate to shout it out. Let me know. But here we're seeing China hit bottom 2nd week of February, and this is actual occupancy, went below 10%. Now, the good news is China has slowly increased over time, and it's up in the occupancy is back to 36. Now that would obviously be dismal at any other point in history, but when you were 10% 10 weeks ago, it's looking pretty good. You also see Europe decline during this time series, and you can see Europe sort of hit bottom that 1st week of April. US did the very same thing. Again, following a decline similar to Europe, although not quite as far down. And US has been honestly a little looser in some of the lockdowns and things. So that's sort of where we're at right now. So this was back at that worst time period in China. You see China markets, and you do see the markets where it began to go outside of China. But look at and this is a RevPar percent change, so revenue per available room, sort of showing a combination of occupancy and ADR. And you can see a lot of areas close to -90, and Sanya, the worst, -91. No surprise, a resort area in China. So that was sort of at its worst. Now, we're going to focus on China a little bit. We'll go back to Asia in a second, but look at China. We see the full time period here where it went down, a big slow recovery. We're beginning to see that pattern, weekday weekend pattern, which I'll drill into in a minute. Just recently, they had the Labor Day holiday, and we saw a spike for that, and that's exciting. We'll show you that in a minute. In terms of the recovery, here we're looking at how the recovery is different in China by different types of cities. I'm picking just 3 cities here, and notice it's a little bit slower in Beijing, a little faster in Hangzhou, Shanghai. Interesting to see all the different cities. Here are some resort areas, and you can see the differences among these resort areas, and you can see the big jump during that festival that took place a couple weeks ago, and a big jump. The good news is, we're seeing that the folks in China are getting out, traveling again, especially domestic travel, weekend travel type thing. Well, we look at that also by the class of hotel. We notice that the mid-scale and economy hotels are seeing the biggest increase in occupancies, but they're also showing the biggest decrease in ADR. So a lot more discounting is going on at the lower end. So we tend to drill into that. If you want more information by class for any area of the world, let me know. One of the bright signs in China is the fact that the number of hotels that have reopened. When we were looking at back in February, we saw a huge number of hotels closed. And of course, we track that because those are the ones submitting data. And but the stories we were hearing out of China at that point in time is that many of the hotels that were closed, we heard they would never reopen. Well, that has not been the case. You can see the reopen rate is very, very high among hotels in China. Here's another thing we're looking at, and this shows you some of those resort destinations. Look at the premium between weekend and weekday occupancy. Now, obviously, the weekday occupancy is going to be more, the business traveler, but big jumps in occupancy on weekend, up to 25% at that one location. The other thing we're seeing is the differences between the city center of many of these areas and the surrounding areas. And I show you just Beijing and Guangzhou and Shanghai, Shenzhen, city center. That'll be another important trend to watch. And this shows just the premiums. May 1 through 3, they're very exciting. Qiangdao Lake occupancy reached 95%. Now that's a big resort destination, but very exciting to see people out there and willing to travel. You hear all these stories of pent-up demand and travel intent, but we're actually seeing that in places in China. Here's a slide, same time period. But this is an area, it's the region of Hainan and the specifically the area of Sanya. So big numbers here from occupancy point of view, even in spite of the air travel situation. And we don't have data on exactly how all those people got to where they were going, but we could research that. I could try to find more of that out. So anyway, good signs coming out of China. Some of the big recovery lessons, look down to first phase demand drivers, domestic leisure, that weekend business we're seeing a lot. Now the corporate business, there we're seeing that at the high-tech zone. So those tend to be the ones that recover very quickly when it comes to business and group travel. And then of course we still have a lot of quarantine guests at hotels close to airports, so we still have, that's still a factor as well. Other factors in there as well, but that's some to highlight. So good to know what's going on in China. Let's take a quick look at Asia. This slide just shows all the various countries in Asia during that time period of March where everything sort of, dove, and we're looking at occupancy percent change, in most areas was down around -80 with a few outliers. I don't have too much Asia data, but if you need it, let me know. I have a lot of Asia data that in the deck, but not much in this presentation. These were the first 4 countries that were total lockdowns, and the time period there was early March. You see all of those going down. China was slightly recovering at that point in time. Here are countries in Asia, and I have a lot of more data on countries throughout Asia, but you can see some of the big ones hit were Vietnam. Singapore was hit in March, but has recovered very well, and other places like Philippines, both of those are sort of outliers. So if you want more Asia data, please let me know. But what I try to do here is focus on Europe. Now let's jump up to Europe, and let's jump up to April. So this was data from just last month. This slide shows throughout Europe the percent of hotels that are closed, and you can see big numbers. Look, some in the 90s in Spain and Portugal, 80s, lots of other places throughout Europe. But there are some outliers. St. Petersburg and Moscow, not many closed. Eastern Europe, a little better. And London, a little better as well. So, big range, but most of these are from the 60s up to 90. That's the percentage of hotels closed at the end of April. So occupancy, this is actual occupancy throughout Europe, and you can see a lot of single digits. Just very few places are higher than that. There are some slight exceptions, but in most of these places, occupancy is very low. Here's just some of the European countries and showing the descent into beginning of April. A lot of these down in the negative 90%. Here are markets. Now this is end of April as well. Look at the major markets throughout Europe. And this slide shows two things. It's the occupancy percent change. So the purple bubble is how far down it is, and then the blue bar is what the actual occupancy is at. So you can see the leader in this is London, and it's still below 20%. Most of these are in the 5 to 10% range in terms of these markets. Not surprising, obviously in an event like this, major markets are going to be more severely impacted. And that's been one of the stories, for example. Oh, I think I have a slide on that for London. I'll wait until the slide gets there. Obviously, Italy was hit first and hit very hard. This is March data in Italy, and we're looking at 90s in most locations, 80 if in a best case scenario. So significantly hard hit. Here shows the time period there, and you can compare that time period to some of the others. You're going to see Italy has a couple week lead on many of these other areas as well. Here's London and Dublin, and this goes back to end of March as well. I'll have some updated data in there. What I do in terms of putting this deck together, folks at STR are giving presentations all over the world, and they're doing it on a regular basis. I'll show you where you can go to find those past ones as well as upcoming, but I'm taking the various decks. Somebody is about to do another one on UK, and then I'll refresh that with April or May data. But you can see, at one of the worst times, this is what we were looking at in London. And you do also see the distinction between the major cities like London and Dublin versus some of the smaller cities as well. That's been an interesting story in London. Here's Germany. Again, end of March data. Major cities in Germany, all 80s and 90%. Here's Germany decline just a couple weeks after Italy, as you might see, and this shows the blue bars is what we're looking at. That's the occupancy in 2020, and this is daily data, so you can see the trends. You can see the dips on Sunday and then the weekend and things like that. Here's data in Switzerland, and significantly impacted there. 10% occupancy is where we're at. You can see the Swiss franc, the ADR go down as well. Austria, big impact there, very low occupancies. France about the same, no difference there. Spain and Portugal, very hard hit, and this is March data. That's another one that is about to be updated as well. But look at the downturns, and here's Spain dropping through the time period throughout March. Portugal about the same, lasted just a little bit more, and some bright signs actually in Portugal, which I'll share with you in a minute. So if you look at the Mediterranean Sea, you can see, and this is a RevPar percent change, so it's a negative number there. You can see hard hit throughout the Mediterranean. And yeah, and one of the things that people thought was that certain areas would be more isolated, and you can see from this that really no area of the world has really been isolated. Here's Greece data just as an example, and showing that below 5% at the current time. If we head north a little bit, the Benelux, we're looking at the major markets there, all in the 90s and the 80s. end of March. We're looking at Netherlands. Didn't see anybody on there, but you can see the decrease. This is a RevPar percent change going, and this actually correlates it with the number of confirmed cases, so you can see the correlation. And then Central Eastern Europe, we're looking at 90s, and again, thought that maybe places would be isolated and far from it. Here are the various Central Eastern Europe capitals, and I know you're not, don't mean you to pull them all out, but you can see March, all of those heading down significantly. Now, one of the big stories that goes along with an event like this is pipeline data. Now, remember, pipeline data would be projects that are under construction and in planning, and you can see what we're beginning to see is big increases in the number of projects that are either deferred, that means postponed, or abandoned, that means given up completely. We'll be tracking that over time, and so I'll share more with you on that as we see the changes. If anybody's interested in that type of data, let me know. Now, this was from a presentation just recently, and looking for green shoots in Europe. We saw some green shoots in Europe and Asia, and but you can see Airbnb bookings beginning to show signs of rebound, and this was interesting in terms of the Algarve. We're seeing some really good positive signs from the Algarve. I was in a webinar just recently with a bunch of folks from Portugal, and they were seeing the very same thing. So again, think about that. That's a destination that is it's a little bit more of a drive-to destination. It's a little bit of a smaller resort area rather than a larger resort area. And we'll talk about recovery scenarios and where we might see the first signs of recovery in coming up in a minute. Business on the books, we track reservation data as well. So you can see that, in some of these areas, we're looking at some markets throughout Europe, we're seeing a fair amount of business on the books coming up for July, August, September, October. Now, it's normal for that to trickle down in the future because it's farther away, but the good news is we're beginning to see some reservations. We call this forward-looking occupancy into the future, so that's good signs. But the pickup is the change in forward occupancy. So if it looks like this at one snapshot in time, then we jump ahead for one more week and we look at it and compare. If it goes up, that's pickup. If it goes down, that's cancellation. So this slide is just showing pickup is still negative. So we are seeing more cancellations and we are seeing increases, but it's not that serious. So we're still sort of optimistic. I didn't see any people from Mideast and Africa. I'm going to run through that really quickly and just show you, as we said, no area has really been immune to this. These are actual occupancies at the end of April. A lot of, some in the 10s and 20s, few 30s. These are the hotels closed, excuse me, the percent closed here. So not as many closed as Europe as you might see, and here are the actual occupancies, a lot of single digits when it comes to the Mideast. Here are Mideast Africa countries towards the end of March, big drops in occupancy. Here are markets, again, not quite as bad as Europe, but still relatively significant, a lot of them in the 20% range. Africa drops in RevPar, major. So even the gateway cities in Africa, the gateway cities even more than some of the other cities as well. And here are a look at Africa. This is a little early March, but still a little data, and then markets as well in Africa. Real quick mention of New York. You can see North America significantly impacted. This is RevPar percent change for March. Little slower, there again, you think about Americas, it really began to hit mid-March. So March was really a blended month. If you look at US, this is showing running 7-day per RevPar percent change. US hit bottom the week of April 11 at about -84. It's back up to -74 at this point in time. So just a 10% increase over rock bottom. This was rock bottom. Now, what this does, just to show you the magnitude of this particular event, this shows the worst week in 2020 compared to the worst weeks in our last two downturns. No comparison, obviously, and so just showing the magnitude. Here's data by class, just showing you that the luxury and upper up hotels everywhere, not just US, are significantly more impacted, as we saw in China. Group business, we do track business separately, group versus transient. You can see group business, that's been no surprise. We were talking before about all the conventions and conferences that are canceled. So group business significantly impacted, pretty much dried up everywhere. If we look at other places in America, just showing Canada, the Canada trend is surprisingly close to the Europe trend. You can see they almost go down together like that. Interesting to see. We're looking at Central America here, big, relatively moderate decreases here, and then throughout South America. All they're seeing there is the fact that it's just behind, a little slower behind some of the rest of the world. Mexico plus all the markets, major downturns down to the neighborhood of 10%. But impact from spring break and you see there, and the Caribbean also significantly impacted as well. So let me take a pause right now just to see, are there any questions up to this point? We're going to sort of transition from performance data to talk a little bit more about recovery and comparisons and things like that. Any questions before we move on?
I've got a question. Have I got my microphone on? Yes, I have. I was surprised when you were doing the overview of the United Kingdom and how some of the occupancy was still fairly high. Does it take into account that some of the hotels were used for other purposes? So, for instance, I know that one hotel chain was using it as rooms instead of people being in a care home. It was being used for residents of a care home. Would that take that into account, or would that not be?
Yeah, that would show up as occupancy.
Right.
So that would basically mean the hotel was not closed. Now, keep in mind too that the hotel closures are factored out from that, so it does make occupancy look a little better. Yeah, so if a hotel is used, in some cases we've seen hotels used at, sort of
quarantine.
Well, for quarantine or sort of as hospitals, or to house medical workers. That's the other thing, because the medical workers don't feel safe going home, so the government or the hospital contracts with a hotel across the street and they stay there instead. So occupancy right now is complicated, and it has many different components that you're not used to having. So it's important to understand that, and it's also, and we just did a big presentation on that to a lot of the hotel companies recently. The average daily rate is therefore complicated as well, because if a government contracts with a hotel to use it for quarantine, well, obviously that's going to be, they're going to get a special rate. It's important to understand that, because when you see big ADR drops, you have to realize, well, that's not just the transient traveler getting all these discounts, it's more complicated than that. And so, yeah, it's definitely a complicated situation that we're in. And that's, a lot of that opens the door for a lot of research opportunities as well. And so if you can think of things as we're looking at this that would be good research ideas, don't hesitate to chat with me about that, and be glad to talk more.
Jalta, you've got a question here? Do you want to ask it directly?
Yeah, I'm looking at your chat there. Yeah, in the U.S. areas, yeah, you see a lot of differentiation, and the one slide I had was top markets, like top 25 markets. In a situation like this, you're going to see a big change between those top markets and the smaller cities, and you're going to see, I showed one slide, I think, that showed interstate hotels. Interstate hotels, the occupancy, when the total occupancy went down to 20, interstate hotels were still at 50. Well, think about it. Truckers, in the U.S., a lot more happens from truck travel rather than train travel, and they're still booming. They're if not, they're booming more, and so
Their
those
business
people
is
are
better
still
than ever.
staying
Yeah.
places. People more confident in staying in a smaller city than in a larger city. That'll be an important aspect going forward. And it's a good question about Berlin. I can, if you shoot me that in an email, I'll send that to Christian, who's officed in Berlin, and see if he has a good answer for that or not.
Cool. We'll follow up on that afterwards.
Good question.
Okay, anybody else got any questions at this particular time? Just turn yourself on. Nope. Okay, off you go then.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about recovery, and of course that's what's on everybody's mind now, and so we're going to look at that sort of midterm, long term, and obviously the questions are, how, when, where, why, what, and how is recovery going to look? Well, first of all, it's complicated because governments have to, governments are involved, and the restrictions are going to be different in different areas. We're trying to track some of those in various countries in Europe, and this is the best we have. If you know of anything more different, feel free to let me know. But a lot of restrictions, so obviously government's going to have to open that up. In terms of how, well, we know that domestic versus long haul is going to be a big impact on travel. So I'll show you more slides on that in a minute, but international travel heavily reliant on air travel, and that's going to be harder. The who and the why, we're going to see, we always in a situation like this, domestic is going to recover quicker. Local travel, drive to destinations are going to be a big, big thing here. They're going to be much more popular, and leisure travel is always going to rebound quicker than business travel. Weekends are going to be a big deal. And the hotel class variations, as we saw, are going to be important as well. So that's going to be the who, and then later on we'll see some more slowly corporate group and international travel rebound. This is some data. We work closely with tourism economics. We do our forecasting with them. We supply their data. We supply our hotel data. They supply their economic data. But this is showing the international, the reliance upon domestic versus international or long haul travel, and the various markets with data, basically how many of their visitors were from both of those different situations. So you can see, some of these markets in the top right quadrant are going to be tend to be recovering more quickly, and so that'll be good news for them. Recovery when long term, and here we're looking at when will it get back to end of year 2019 levels. We're going to see, obviously 2020 is going to be a downturn. We're going to start recovering in 2021 and then back to 2022. A lot of people thinking that the recovery profile, and last time I shared, I talked to you a little bit about, the letters. People try to think, well, it's going to be a V recovery, and I showed some SARS data, and that was a very quick downturn, quick rebound. The whole thing took 6 to 9 months. Not going to be like that at all. People originally were hopeful. Then I showed pictures of a U recovery or a L recovery, and then W recovery. This is sort of, I think in that original deck I called it a wonky W, and but the idea is that it goes down, it goes back up. There's a little bit of a drag, and that could be that could be longer, and then eventually it begins to go back up. So that's sort of what people are thinking about in this situation. From a European point of view, we're thinking about getting back to 2019 levels. We predict that in about 2022. A lot of that will happen in 2021, but all the way back, especially from an inflation adjusted point of view, not until 2022. I like this slide that one of our folks used. Just lots of different risks involved in a prediction like this, but that's our best guess. Important to see that this downturn is already significantly worse than the downturn in 2009. So no rosy pictures here. This is showing the purple is the Europe data, the blue just for references to China data, but it's already significantly worse than the 2009 downturn. One of the things people are looking at is from a recovery point of view, RevPar versus GOPar. So think about it, RevPar is just a raw performance, where GOPar is the operational effectiveness, and I think there's a lot of hope that in this particular scenario that won't be the same time lag. The hope is, of course, that hoteliers today are more effective managers than they were in 2009. Well, time will tell to see if that's really the case. Here's profitability recovery for some of the countries in Europe. And we're looking at a total Europe recovery, and then how it differs among some of the countries as well. If you'd like more information on the profitability data, don't hesitate to let us know. So recovery will be very different by country. Obviously, the reliance upon international tourism will be an important part in here, and this shows some data, again, from our friends at Tourism Economics on reliance on international data, short haul versus long haul, and then some of the city destinations, countries and cities. So, definitely going to be different throughout. Recovery will be different for different areas. It'll be different for different types of hotels. This is looking at economic cycles around the world. This graph is pretty similar everywhere. It is a US graph. It does show the two most recent cycles, the 2001 cycle versus the 2009 cycle. I think people are sort of hoping that this will be a little bit more like the 2001 cycle. 12 months to hit bottom, 24 months to recover. And this shows ADR differences during those two cycles as well. This is running data as opposed to monthly data. So we can talk more about that if you have questions. The difference between group and transient is important, and this shows from a recovery point of view, as we said before, the transient business is going to recover much quicker, 7-month time frame, where group demand is going to take more like 24 months to recover. So those are the types of hotels that are going to be recovering first. Think about it. If you have students that are getting ready to graduate, they want to go to work in a group hotel, a convention hotel, or a conference hotel, they're going to be much more much less likely to get a job in a conference hotel than in a hotel that focuses on transient business. Think of it a boutique type, resort type situation, going to recover quickly. This shows the ADR differences, and it does help understand that in a lot of situations there was significant discounting to get that transient ADR back traveling again. The hope is that there won't be as much discounting in this cycle. People are thinking that current revenue management technology and experience is going to help improve that in this cycle than it did in 2001 or in 2009. We'll have to see that to believe it. Another type of hotel, luxury resorts, they're going to tend to rebound quickly. That type of traveler is more apt to get back quicker than the group business, the conference, the convention. So if I'm still employed, if I still have a job, I'm more apt to be back on the road quicker. And so again, that's the type of hotel that's going to tend to recover quickly. And don't forget about the domestic travel. Those drive-to destinations are going to be much more popular. You see the downturn in 2009, outbound versus domestic, and much less impact on the drive-to destinations. So that's about it for that little section. I'll mention briefly 2 resources, STR.com. You can go on there and see any past webinars. Now, the webinar that I just did was pretty global in nature, but we're doing webinars now that are very focused Eastern Europe or Germany, Austria, Switzerland, or Asian markets, or India Ocean, and you'll see them on the STR.com website. Our sister company, hotelnewsnow.com, that's a news service, but as you can guess, almost every article is virus related. And then as far as a share center is concerned, I think all of you are academics. Please let us know how we can help you. We make all this data that you're looking at available for research, student projects, and use in the classroom. You can pick any personalized sets of data. We're more than glad to brainstorm with you on research. We have a huge number of professors doing research, so I can connect you with them. If you have an idea that somebody else has thought of, I'll say, hey, do you want to talk to this person? A lot of data-related possibilities. You can take our data and correlate it with third-party data or survey data that you do yourself. Think of it, our data is performance data, so you can relate the performance to third-party data like reviews or like Google search or your own survey. If you do a survey on management style or technology or diversity, you can correlate performance data to see if whatever your findings are for different types of hotels, do your findings correlate with performance? We're working with many of your schools now. All the training that we make available, or most of all the training that we make available, is available to offer in an online format, including our 2 most popular certifications, the CHIA, the Certification in Hotel Industry Analytics. You can do that totally online. The newer one is advanced, the Certification in Advanced Hospitality and Tourism Analytics. We call it the CATA. That was launched last year. Again, that can be done totally online. So even if you have a faculty member who has not done this before, we make it real easy. There are videos that they can use for each one of these. We handhold them. The training programs are incredibly comprehensive with exercises and quizzes. And then what we're doing, starting in the next couple of weeks during the summer, we're going to have virtual train-the-trainer sessions. So we'll be working with faculty to get you up and running on both of these. So let us know if we can help you do that. The other thing that we're finding, we're doing with a lot of schools is, especially during the summer, we're doing virtual internships, because we know that in a lot of situations, internships that students had scheduled with hospitality establishments have been canceled and therefore they need to substitute something. Well, we can basically help you create a virtual internship where students would complete a comprehensive research project. It'd be industry relevant, they'd be using industry data, they'd be analyzing that, they'd be creating presentations, communicating their findings. You can get industry people involved. We'll tell you how other schools are doing that. And so if you're desperate for an internship situation, you can basically create a virtual internship based upon a research project. Now that could be a market study, it could be an event impact analysis. Many schools are using COVID-19 as the event that their students are analyzing, and they're just giving them different, they're working in a class and they're giving each different one a different city somewhere in the world to see the impact of the virus on that specific city. If you want more information on that, just let me know and we can send you out a whole lot of that. There are other things that we do online, and this year a couple of you have participated in our market study competition. This year we're not going to do one face-to-face, but we will have our first virtual competition. It'll be in November, and our biggest competition has been 50 schools so far. So we're dreaming, if we do it virtually, we may get above 50. And in our wildest dreams, we're thinking we may hit 100. But let us know if you'd be interested in more information about that. And here's how to get in touch with us. Our generic email address, sharecenter@str.com. And then any ideas or questions you have for me, don't hesitate to drop me an email, shood@str.com, almost at the bottom there. And that's sort of what we do, and we can get you hooked up. I think every school involved looked like they were already a member, so we can get you more information though. So let me stop at this point. Any questions about the recover scenarios or the lessons to learn or research ideas that you might have? Let's open it up. Feel free to, I'm gonna stop sharing slides and go back to the if you have questions though, feel free. Sorry.
Any questions, anybody? I've got one or two, but anybody got anything that they want to say directly to Steve? No? Well, I'll start off, Steve. I know that you mentioned Sweden as you went along, but what's happened about Sweden? Because obviously they've had very different regime to perhaps some of the other countries, haven't they? Is anything more noticeable with Sweden, or is it just about the same as everywhere else?
That's a good question, Ray. I noticed that data was not in there, and let me try to drill down and get you more information on Sweden. I have a huge deck to start with, and I parsed that down to get, as you can tell, to get 115 slides, and so I left out a few, but I can actually try to see if I can find that while we're while other people are asking questions too.
Anybody want to say something? I've got another question here if no one else is going to ask one. One of the anomalies in the UK, and I'm sure it's only just for the time being, but with regards to domestic tourism, a lot of these resorts don't want domestic tourism. They don't want people to visit because they don't want, the sort of the occurrence of perhaps the virus spreading into their beauty spots, etc. And I don't know whether or not anyone else has found that in terms of domestic tourism.
Yeah, now that'll be really interesting. I was looking at several articles, similar to that, Ray. Like one was how willing will destinations be to welcome the Chinese tourist back? Mm-hmm. And think about the think about the reliance upon Chinese tourists, the China tourist in different areas around the world. If you look at it just within U.S., places like L.A. and Miami, Orlando, New York, huge reliance upon the China tourist. And if you cut that out, you're cutting out, I think, 10-20%. And so I think that'll be an important issue here when it comes to that, the mindset of the destination. And this looks like a little bit more of a hospitality crowd than a tourism crowd. But if you have been watching TriNet and all the various discussions from the tourism professors, boy, there's a lot of discussion related to what tourism is going to look like post COVID-19, and so I think that'll be really interesting. If think about it, if I was a destination right now, I would be trying to figure out ways to implement safety and precautions, and but then to get the people back. And on my website, I'd be showing pictures of hotels being cleaned and the destination, taking safety precautions. And if I was the hotel, once people did start coming back, I would have pictures all over my website of, families at the beach, families at the pool, social distancing, but still having a good time. And it'll be real interesting to see.
Okay. Anybody else got a question?
Maria, I noticed you joined us. Any more information? What are you seeing in London? Oh, John, you're having to go. I was going to ask you if you wanted to share anything on Madrid, if you have time before you go. Anything on Spain that you're seeing? Unmute if you still have time.
Hey, Steve.
John Lohr from Hosco, anything you're seeing in Spain?
For our side, it's always about what the employment, the recruitment is looking like, rather than your side of the data, which is a nice complementary thing. But real quick, what I can just share is we did this kind of hospitality pulse, which was interviewing like the HR directors and seeing how things are looking. And overall, we found that they still think this is having an extreme impact on their hiring, and nothing's going to get back to normal until Q1 of 2021. And that was taken from a majority Spanish hotels. So we got a while to go,
Yeah.
The number one concerns are still financial management, and then workforce health and safety, and then workforce engagement and upskilling after that. So yeah.
No, makes total sense. And that's, that's what I think everybody's looking at in terms of, from John's perspective, what types of hotels will be rebounding first. And think about it from all of your perspective. You have folks that are getting ready to graduate. When your poor student comes to you and says, what do I do? Helping them understand what type of hotels are going to recover. Don't think about, and I'm looking at this from a U.S. perspective, but don't think about the resort in Miami or the resort in California. Be thinking about the resort in the Smoky Mountains that is a drive-to destination where people are going to be able to go hang out in the woods maybe instead of hanging out on the beach. Those are going to be the things that are going to those are going to be the types of hotels that are going to be hiring first, and where your students might be more likely to find jobs. The other interesting thing I'm seeing with some of the schools are proactively offering sort of a, for their students who would have normally graduated this year, they're offering an easy way to get a 5th year master's. So stay one more year, get a master's, top off sort of, and then be graduating, like John said, in 2021 rather than in 2020, which is going to definitely have some advantages too. So
the one thing I'll share, Steve, before I got to run, is that, and I'm actually hosting a webinar myself for Hosco at 5 o'clock. But the soft skills, it's the soft skills, it's the emotional intelligence, the entire way a hospitality talent treats themselves from being operational in the past is going to be much more human engaged, human focused, almost even thinking themselves like nurses rather than rather than operational people. It's going to be so important for the employers going forward.
Yeah, there's going to be plenty of housekeeping jobs going.
Housekeeping is going to go up to #1 priority.
We took it out of our courses years ago because they didn't like it.
#1.
And now it's
Back. Thank you all. I need to run. Take care.
Thanks,
Hey, John.
John.
Bye.
What
Maria,
about
I know
any reports from Iceland at all in terms of the way the market's going up there?
Yeah, appreciate you sharing. I didn't have any Iceland data as I here. There he is.
I
Yeah.
think it is interesting right now, and it's we are opening up the country on June 15th with some regulations, but almost the whole industry is just shut down. It's really, most of hotels are closed. The hotels on the countryside are opening for the summer because the government decided to pay really for the 3 months. If you pay the staff for 3 months, if you really let them go, and they all have 3 months period until they lose their job. So we will see how hotels maybe open on the countryside in the summer, but we are very worried about the fall. You know, the air traffic is the most important for us. So will people be ready to fly anytime soon? That's a big question.
Right, right. That's the challenge your country would certainly face. That's a shame.
That is, and I would love to see some data from if you have some data from Iceland, it would be awesome to see it. I will send you an email later on.
Drop me an email. Yeah, I know we have it. It's not, you know, and anytime we share data, we share exactly who participates, so you'll know.
Thank you.
Maria, I noticed you were on. So good to have you join us. Do you want to share any perspective from the UK or from London?
Oh, hi, Steve. Unfortunately, I'm not anywhere near London and haven't been for quite a long time. Sorry about that. So perhaps Ariane might be able to help. I don't know if, or Lisa, they might be able to help maybe.
Good to see you, Maria. Thanks for dropping in.
Yeah, I'm in London. I mean, looking out my window, there's not much going on.
Yeah, pretty quiet.
Yeah, very quiet. Lisa could probably jump in, but it's you know, we've been obviously in contact with employers for, as you mentioned, our internships, and you know, we've had to be quite flexible on that. I think we've sort of changed them from being between the second and the third year to being at the end of the third year, so that gives more flexibility. Obviously, employers, I don't think their priority right now is taking in interns, unfortunately. But it was interesting to hear what you were saying, Ray, about, you know, the number of hotels in London that are either catering for the NHS or for homeless people, and of course that will, you know, that will impact on the numbers that are perhaps looking a little bit rosier than they really are. That sounds like what the government's doing anyway. So.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. No, it's much more complicated to try to, you know, when you share somebody, oh, it's 40% occupancy. Well, let's break
Lisa,
that down into the various components.
Going on your end?
Yeah, a really similar picture. I think, particularly as us being around the XL Centre and around that sort of area where NHS Nightingale and that was put up, a lot of information about the hotels and that they're of course being used by the NHS staff and everything else. I think that skews the data slightly, shall we say, with how rosy the picture may look, because the word on the street isn't as rosy. Same thing again with placements. We've had students that are due to go out next month to America for a year's placement. Of course, now is not happening, so trying to sort of rearrange things where that's concerned. And I'm in agreement. In fact, at the moment, students or graduates aren't the priority for employers, and I think it's something that in academia need to be quite gainful of, and how we actually then help the students to be able to look at what the next stages are, so they're not feeling as if they're left sort of floundering like a sort of a fish out of water. I think that's an important thing to take on board.
Yeah.
I think this just has some interesting implications with regard to student recruitment. I sort of think we're oscillating between actually students will want to, enter into either a master's or an undergraduate course. We've always seen a correlation between student recruitment and recessions, where students obviously stay in education. But that would be great. But then on the flip side, who wants to study hospitality, tourism, or aviation right now?
You've also got the issue of the international market for the students coming over as well, and particularly if you're sort of quite reliant on those international students, where are they going to be come September? So there's things to consider a lot, I think, to be able to look at that recruitment market coming in for the programs as well going forward for 2020-21.
I think it's time, Maria, to dust off that old HCIMA in institutional management, don't you reckon?
Yes.
You had a question, answer, Sophia.
Sophia, yeah, I just heard about that Portuguese seal.
Hi. I'm
Oh,
so
yeah,
sorry. Hi. I'm so sorry.
Yeah,
I'm wearing Leeds in Portugal, so what can I say? I got a little bit late because I got my times confused. That's me. So you know me, I've got to make an entrance. But yes, so Portugal has issued. So our Visit to Portugal institution, which looks after it all. I'm going to call it a ministry, but it's not. But maybe after all this, the guy's going to be knighted. Came up with a certification of clean and safe, and they're going through accommodation providers, tourist operations, and travel agents, and you can get the certification for free, and you put the seal on your doors or on your operations. They were talking about it on CNN today, and it's been all over the British press on Saturday, Forbes, all over. And all the training has started this week, free of charge for anybody who wants to get the seal. So let's see, we are opening all our restaurants for open to public on Monday. Some hotels have started operation, but predominantly the rural ones, so big city centers, depends. Porto opened a few yesterday. You've got different bits. So you've got one hotel that's only running at a third of its capacity, and then it leaves the rooms free for 72 hours before a new person can come in.
Oh, neat.
Yeah, so there's some interesting things to be looking and monitoring. So I don't mind, or if Ray doesn't mind, sending what I find on the press, because I've started a file called COVID Learning for myself whilst I sit here and just look at what's being said. So I don't mind putting together whatever comes through as an article, as a press, and sharing it to Ray, and then you could send it to the network. I think the more we share, the better it is. I will try to do, I think the qualification is all in Portuguese, but if it was in English, I would ask permission to sell it, to share it. God, you can see I'm unemployed. You can see I'm unemployed. I need to earn. I'm in between jobs. So what I meant was anything that's on the press, I following it, I really don't mind sending it. And Steve, I don't think it would hurt if you wanted to contact the head of the Portuguese tourism, Luís Araújo, and speak to him, because I'm sure it is something. I'm not saying, I did the training yesterday, part 1. I'm going to do it on Monday, part 2. But they're looking to entrust trust onto the customers, because you can't sell safety and you can't sell cleanliness, but you can do your utmost to reassure and ensure trust. So that's the big campaign. So
Sophia, send me that, and I'll also send it to Terry. He's the Hotel News Now editor in London. Okay. If he hasn't already heard about that, I think he might love to learn about that, to do an article.
Yeah, I'll send you the articles I've got, because I know it's been on the Telegraph yesterday or today. It's been on CNN today. Forbes picked it up. 2, 3. So Ray, if you don't, if I've got your email, Ray, it's easier.
Yeah,
If I forward it to you, if that's okay.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
then
fine.
if Terry in London, I'll put the contact of the Visit to Portugal office in London. There's a permanent office in London, so Terry could speak to Claudia. So I can hook them up via LinkedIn or anything if he hasn't already hooked up with her, because it could be that it's there already.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, some of anything that you've got, and I could always circulate it to.
Yeah.
If anybody else is interested, I can circulate it. But yeah, I mean, as I say, I mean, my background was in accommodation management, and I worked in the health service. But as the years have gone on, the whole of the cleaning side was taken out because students couldn't see the relevance of why we needed to clean. Well, you know, it all comes full circle, doesn't it? It comes back again. So
well,
it's a matter.
Yeah, it wasn't sexy. The sexy thing was to have a tattoo and be behind a stove. And that was it. Anyway, I'm going to shut off my microphone because I'm going to offend somebody.
All right,
It's
then.
nice to see you. I'll send you all of them.
Any more questions? Anybody got any more questions at all? Anybody from? Yeah. Anybody said anything there? No. No.
Ariane and Lisa, what school are you from? Remind me.
University of West London, I think.
UWL. Okay, perfect.
UWL. Lisa is University of East London. We're at opposite ends of the city.
Remind me about your U.S. internships as well. I had an idea that might help for that. We can talk more about the virtual internship idea. That's totally something we're thinking about, talking to professors, trying to figure out what works, what doesn't, and how we can help. But I had an interesting idea about the U.S. Locations too.
Yeah, that would be fantastic if we could catch up about that to be able to come up with some alternative plans. That would be great.
Perfect. Well, folks, I really enjoyed it. Oh, I keep forgetting. I'm going to turn off the recording.